from the point of view of the statistics, the biggest effect that cybercrime has had is in putting people off online transactions. There's a significant minority of the population just won't shop online. My parents wouldn't get online supermarket deliveries until they were snowed in for a week, for example. And so when the police do nothing and banks dump the risk and so on, there's actually a big social externality in terms of costs imposed on the rest of society. And in countries that have better consumer protection, such as the Netherlands and Finland, you get a higher use of online services. As a result, there's more online shopping, more people use e-government services, the banks can close down lots of branches and do lots of transactions online, which brings an extra fee income, so everybody wins. But it's a collective action problem. To get there, you need better regulation.
I have a question in that regard, if you don't mind. About 2 months ago, I ran a session with our academic professors in law regarding cybercrime. And when I showed them the facts and the statistics, some of them were skeptical to whether or not the police should look into cybercrime and try to regulate it, or is it the parliament that is supposed to regulate it? And some of them have suggested that it is an externality that should be accepted, and it's the opportunity cost of using technology. So what do you think of that?
Well, there are many technologies where things go better once you have some regulation. An example is taxi service. If you go and want to get a taxi in many less developed countries, it's an absolute ruck at the airport. And you're frightened to use a taxi because you're feared that you'll get ripped off, that you'll be taken on a trombone-type journey, or that you may even be robbed or killed. It's actually better business for taxi drivers to have regulation like you have in cities in Europe. You can just go out of the terminal at Heathrow, you can hail any cab, and you know it's safe. So yes, there are costs with technology, but the role of government is to figure out what these costs are and the extent to which they can be mitigated by regulation.
I mean, if I can maybe jump in here, certainly from my research, the thing that I've noticed having the most impact is the recognition of harmful and illegal content offences, particularly growing awareness around child protection issues, so child pornography, grooming, that sort of thing, but also in relation to offensive content, so stalking, trolling, that sort of thing. But in relation to the question of who should decide what is problematic, I guess that's the role of the legislature. So the legislature is the area which we look to say, okay, what is criminal, what is not criminal. If we think about criminal law as the area of law that governs behaviour that is deemed so bad that the state has to wade in, then that's a job for the legislature. It's the police's job to investigate, go to the CPS to prosecute, but I don't really. I mean, it might be maybe that the police will notice new trends, but I guess it dissolves into a debate of whether you see cybercrime as qualitatively or quantitatively new. So is this old crimes that we already have that are just being carried out in a new medium, or is it actually new crimes that we need to start thinking from scratch about?
Well, I agree, but there's a missing piece in the middle, which I alluded to in the last point in my last slide, which is who sets the incentives for the police, right? And the police that I've talked to who are below the rank of chief constable generally have no discretion at all. You know, they'll set their goals and their targets, and they can't just go off and decide to spend £20,000 worth of police time investigating a £700 fraud. A chief constable can do that within limits, but most of them aren't bothered to do so. And so there are many cases where there are clearly criminal offences being committed, but there's no enforcement action because the machinery in the middle is broken. And I expect that you'll find this just as pervasively in domestic abuse, child protection, social work, and so on and so forth.
I mean, if anyone's interested, the work of Dave Wall in relation to policing the internet is very useful here. He's written quite extensively on the question of policing and also the budgets of policing. There's quite a little area of research that looks at this problem. And yes, certainly one of the questions is, what is the political priority of the day? Is it car crime? Is it battered women? You know, what gets the most votes?
I mean, I've been at conferences where the chief of police has said that e-crime is the #1 priority, and then when the budget comes out, it's all to do with policemen on the beats, domestic crime, physical crime, because that's what the public want and that's what wins votes.
Some of the suggestion in that debate was that it's a cost that the whole society should pay for in terms of insurance, for example, cover of insurance, as it is when we talk about credit card fraud. Individuals are not really paying, but the whole society is distributed over the whole society, and it's the same thing as any other crime, and therefore it should be left and not looked into. I might not genuinely agree with that, but I would want to see a contribute to that.
Well, it depends on the facts of the case and of the technology. Now, if you go back 15 years ago, spam was a mom and pop operation. Right? There were tens of thousands of people sending spam from their home computers, earning small amounts of money. There's still such a few people in India. And if that's the threat that you face, one of the appropriate countermeasures is to run a spam filter. But nowadays, most spam is sent by a small number of large gangs who use botnets to do it. And you can see this in many, many ways when you look at the data. And if you've got 3 large gangs sending most of the world's spam, the efficient way of dealing with them is to break their doors down at 6 in the morning and take them away in handcuffs. Much, much cheaper than requiring people to spend hundreds of millions of pounds on spam filters.
There's also, of course, just a huge technology gap in terms of skills. I mean, the police don't have the skills to combat sophisticated cybercrime, and it will take some years before that technology gap closes, just because things are changing so rapidly. Do you have some more questions, by the way? I think this man had a question, did you?
I was thinking the question addressed to you. Your talk reminded me of a paradigm called proof-carrying code. So can we have a sort of verifiable or some certificates of some certificate of verifiable privacy attached to our information, exchange? What do you think?
I think that you're absolutely right. I mean, technically, these topics are very connected. The topic of proof-carrying code, where the writer of the code also writes a proof that the code has certain characteristics, and that proof is machine verifiable, with the idea of zero-knowledge proofs and so on in cryptography. And I think that they're all good ideas. One of the big challenges that I see with any of these things is how users should interface with that. Because users don't want to understand proofs, obviously. They don't want to understand keys. They don't want to understand anything, actually. They just want to do whatever it is they want to do, online shopping or email or Facebook or whatever. Now, of course, the idea is that they don't have to understand proofs. The way those proofs are digested and consumed is just done in software on their browser. They have to know that they're using the right browser, and they have to know that their computer really is running that browser. So it's actually very difficult to both do this in a convincing way and to leave the user out of the loop. I think that's a big challenge. I think that's part of the challenge of making security usable. And I think we're a long way from having a very good solution to that.
So maybe formal methods could play a role here?
I think formal methods certainly play a role in all of these things, in trying to understand what the properties of computer systems are generally. But that doesn't solve the problem that users have. That addresses the problem that the professionals that make the systems have, but it doesn't directly solve the problems of users, of course.
Yeah, was pharma infringement. What exactly, is that counterfeiting pharmaceuticals, or what exactly is pharma infringement? Is that?
Fake Viagra spam.
Oh, I see.
Until a year or two ago, Viagra was still in patent. And so if you went and bought Viagra online, which was mailed to you, from some factory in India or China, then that was patent infringement. And when that's done on an industrial scale, it's a crime. It was a very interesting case study because in 2010, a third of all the spam in the world was sent by one gang, the Rustok botnet, which was basically selling Viagra. And a colleague of mine, a co-author on the paper, Stefan Savage of UCSD, traced this carefully. He went and made test purchases. He analysed the stuff that came through, and it was actually okay. He then traced the money, and what he discovered was that the way to crack down on crimes like that is to follow the money. Because to a first approximation, all of the money that was being spent on fake Viagra went through one bank, Gazbank in Azerbaijan, right, which has no customers. It was set up by Leonid Brezhnev to lend money to the gas industry in Baku. And somehow or another, the bad guys had persuaded these guys to provide them with credit card acquisition services. So all that the Pfizer people should have done to close this scam down is get the lawyers to write to Visa and MasterCard and insist that they remove Gazbank from the network. So, again, you have to do the spade work to track this sort of thing down, but that's the sort of thing that the drug industry is occasionally worried about, fake mail order pharma online. In America, they're worried very, very much more, because in America, the price of normal ethical pharmaceuticals is about 3 times what it is in Canada, and people have to pay for their own drugs.
Yeah.
So lots of older people in America basically buy their pharmaceuticals either in person from Canada, they go over there in the coach and shop, or else they buy it nowadays by mail order or over the internet. And the American pharma industry thinks that this is an absolutely monstrous crime against their profits.
I mean, conceivably it might also encompass data mining to find out formulae from big companies. It might also include wider, not necessarily pharma, but intellectual property theft, so copying, ripping, that sort of thing.
I actually have a second question, just to follow up. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Silk Road, but they're the largest online drug marketplace, and recently there was a trial, and the founder, he was convicted for, I guess, facilitating millions of dollars worth of drug transactions. He was also convicted, I believe, of an attempted murder for hire scheme. And I just want to know, do you think the migration of the illegal drug trade onto the internet, or towards online marketplaces, makes the war on drugs more futile or actually easier to combat? It's a general question for the panel.
Well, undoubtedly it makes things more difficult because, for example, the Silk Road uses bitcoins, and the idea of Bitcoin, at least in part, is that it's like real cash, so you don't have the traceability of online payments that you have with Visa or other credit cards. Bitcoin is not completely private because there is a public log of every transaction that took place. But it can be hard to figure out who participated in the transactions if the person who participates takes care to generate new keys for every transaction they are involved with. So that's why Bitcoin has quite good privacy properties as far as the spender and payee is concerned. And that's where they get, that's how Silk Road works.
I would agree with you that the war on drugs is futile to begin with, and it's nice to see that Nick Clegg was recently pointing out that in Portugal, where they decriminalised drug possession a number of years ago, both use and convictions have dropped steadily. And we see now that in 3 US states it's legal to go and buy dope, so presumably that's the direction that the ball is rolling down the mountain. And within 10 or 15 years, the rest of the legislators will get with it, and this problem will be solved by parliaments rather than by technology.
What about a Dutch case where it is legal to go and buy drugs, certain drugs, yeah? But they keep a record of you, so when we are looking for someone with problems who might have done something wrong. They will look at you.
So not all the problems associated with technology are fundamentally technology problems, but sometimes shifts in the technological frontier can cause things to be seen in a new light. And certainly one of the benefits that we get from the internet is that people are nowadays better informed. It's easier to keep in touch with people that you knew overseas when you were younger. It's dead easy to read newspapers and watch TV from overseas. And so, you know, you can have a levelling effect whereby good ideas spread. That's not part of the computer security agenda, but it's part of the bigger societal security agenda, that good ideas can spread and bad ones can be combated.
I have a question. And I think I'll start Dr. Chatterjee. I mean, here at Leicester, or I'm sure, I don't know if other institutions, the law course doesn't really delve into technology, and it appears that area operate in a silo. Now, for the law students who are coming out, who will be graduating in the future, is there any effort, or are there efforts to find some ways to try to integrate the information technology side with the law aspect? Because if you wait until Parliament, technology continues to innovate, whereas law is still trying to understand what was innovated 10 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think much has changed since I was doing my degree, in that the law degree was very much dominated by the qualifying subjects. So you have to do all the big boring ones and then choose your interesting options around that. And I say this as someone who does teach on the boring options, but I think that the debate over what is included in legal education is currently in quite a bit of flux. You might have heard of something called the Legal Education and Training Review that's been currently underway. And there's always a debate between what the professions want and what the universities want to teach. And the universities might like to have more freedom over what they teach, and the profession saying, but we want certain skills things. I mean, I think it's open to question as to why the core subjects are there. So why are we still looking? Just to pick at randomly at equity and trusts or land, when a lot of people might be perhaps more persuaded by business law or commercial law. Why are the core subjects there? And this is one of the things that's being currently open to debate. So in relation to your question, are there any efforts to join up a skills gap with law? Not that I know of, but there are quite big organisations such as Leicester that try and bridge gaps between technological know-how and legal education. But I think it's something that will be increasingly pressing as time goes on. So who knows, in 20 years' time, the core of the law degree might look completely different, and it might have cybersecurity as part of that, and the legal issues relating to computer technology. I don't think there are any plans to include it in the core, and I think that's an interesting question as to why not.
Yeah, and I just want to follow up on the cybercrime, stalking and domestic abuse part when it comes to electronic evidence. And this is a general question. Before, the perception or understanding is electronic evidence may be indisputable. But as we've seen, or we've heard earlier today, there's a possibility that even that, without the metadata, without any other corresponding information, in a question of when you're prosecuting a case or when you're defending a case, or what other, if all you have to rely on is an evidence that would vanish, Snapchat or whatever, how do you go about making sure the authentication or the validation of your evidence will stand up in court?
You need good forensic people to do the searching for you. My understanding is, and I'm not a forensic expert, but my understanding is that when forensic experts take over the computer, they have to follow very strict protocols. There are certain guidelines that you have to follow in order to make sure that when you are bringing your evidence to court, that it is acceptable and admissible evidence to the court. How those protocols relate to emerging technology is another question, but certainly those protocols will need to be in place if the evidence of your forensic expert is going to be admissible.
Well, one of the big growing issues at the moment, which should be of interest to lawyers, is the issue of jurisdiction. Because more and more, the evidence that people want isn't sitting on, the laptop that you confiscate from your drug dealer. It's sitting on his Gmail account or his Facebook account or whatever. It's in the cloud. It's sitting in a data center in Oregon. Now, how that works is that while human life is under threat, while the guy is wielding his meat cleaver in the streets of London, the police can phone up Facebook's emergency ops center in Dublin and get stuff bang like that on an intelligence basis. But as soon as life is no longer at threat, as soon as the handcuffs are on and the guy's going away in the van, you've got to go through your mutual legal assistance treaty. And at present, that's taking 8 months to get data out of America. Why? Because it all has to go through the Department of Justice in Washington. They've got a queue. They don't have enough money. Congress won't give them enough money because it's involved in a political game playing thing with Obama. And as a result, you can wait a year for your data. Now, there's another problem here, which makes it even more serious. Here's a typical issue that I heard from Google's security guys. A family court in India issues an order to Google saying it must hand over the Gmail of somebody who lives in Canada and has never been in India in his life, and imposes a lifetime secrecy order on it. Now, what do you do if you're Eric Schmidt? Right? You can't, at the same time, give believable guarantees of privacy to your users in Canada, and also have anybody with an engineering password physically present in India, because the court will compel him to break Canadian law. Right? So what we're seeing is that the big service companies are ending up having to withdraw their staff, their engineering staff, from one country after another. And right now, for example, Google's putting all its engineers out of Russia because Putin made a law which says, I'm entitled to read everybody's Gmail everywhere in the world. So Google's only possible response is, no Google employee may go to Russia with an engineering logon in his possession. End of story. And in general, the problem you get is this, that for all sovereigns, Alice and Bob, Alice passes a law saying I'm entitled to read all electronic stuff of my citizens and also of Bob's citizens. And it passes another law saying service companies aren't allowed to give Bob any data on my citizens. So you've got a complete conflict of laws, a classic prisoner's dilemma that's completely gumming up the system. Now, to my way of thinking, the only realistic way forward is a new kind of cybercrime treaty, which means that countries will be able to get at data in other countries and will be obliged to keep some kind of 24/7 presence so that stuff can be handed over through due process. But there are many, many other issues. How do you deal with countries where the human rights are not particularly well observed?
Well, it's a classic dilemma of international law, isn't it? How do you get countries to cooperate? I mean, there is the Budapest Treaty on cybercrime. You may or may not have heard of this.
Cybercrime Convention.
Tries to lay down some kind of bare bones of a baseline, but even that was controversial, and certainly not everyone signed up to that. And
one of the reasons that the Department of Justice sits and stuff for 8 months, they want to think long and hard about how much do we trust the Egyptians today.
Exactly. International law is as a non-lawyer, international law is a minefield because countries just don't trust each other.
International law is great. I'd like to sell it to you if I can, but it is also a minefield.
It is a minefield.
It's the perfect intersection of politics and law.
And the answer to your question, I don't know specifically about law, but there are moves afoot to get IT and cybersecurity into almost every degree now, because it's such a part of life. So it's almost to make it a core subject for everybody, just as mathematics is a core subject at schools. Now the discussions are taking place, and I have nothing to say specifically about law, because I don't take part in these discussions. But there are lots of discussions about getting cybersecurity and IT courses into MBAs, because businesses rely on technology. And the IT savvy lawyer is worth his weight in gold at the moment, because there's so few of them. IT savvy judges are even fewer. So it's coming. I'm sure it will come. And discussions have started, but I don't know any formal committee that's sitting down to look at it.
There's always been a tension between what the professions want and what the academy wants, because the law degree is still a liberal arts degree, whereas the professions say we provide further training. So roughly 50% of graduates in law don't actually go into the law degree. So the university might rightly turn around and say, well, why do I need to include all this stuff if they're not going to practice anyway? And if the professions say, well, we want you to include X, Y, and Z, the university will say, well, a lot of our constituents don't even go to you. So if you want specific training, do it at graduate, so BPTC, training contract level, not at undergraduate. So there's a question of whether it should be included, but also a question of where. So might it only be at the level of postgraduate that you get this sort of thing? So currently I think you need to study the law of evidence if you want to practice in certain places, mainly Northern Ireland. It's encouraged if you want to be a barrister, but I don't actually think it's compulsory as one of the core subjects. And it's, I think, a pretty key one if you're interested in cyber.
Just one more question. With regards to cloud technology, what's your take? Just as a general question, because I think the point Professor Anderson was making, there was an instance where I used to work for General Dynamics in the United States defense contractor, and you have data being stored in the desert because of the solar power. You have data centers there. The crime was committed in another country. There was almost 4 or 5 jurisdictions. The question often arises, where do you prosecute? And I think the point you make, Professor Piper, is that in terms of jurisdiction, the questions that we always ask was, what's most favorable at the end of the day to the case, to the situation? So cloud had made things more murky now, where before you can say that happened in China, but then the server is actually in Slovenia somewhere.
Well, a lot of prosecutions happen in America because that's where the enforcement is. There's another interesting point. Anybody read the sentencing guidelines recently? What do you think would be the starting point for sentencing somebody, if you defrauded him £25,000, for example, by, saying you'd sell him a flat in Spain that doesn't exist? Do you know what your tariff would be?
I don't remember.
Face-to-face 2 years, but online or electronic 2 months. Okay? So in Britain, cyber crimes are what you should do if you're a villain, right? If you never get within, a spitting distance of the victim, it's considered to be a very much less serious offence. America takes a very different view, sometimes even a harsher view, and certainly they never give you a discount for doing it online. So if you're a bad guy who ripped him off in some kind of phishing scam, and I'm a prosecutor, I want to prosecute you in America, mate. I'm going to send you to Fort Leavenworth. You're going to spend the next 20 years sewing mailbag. Prosecute him here, what's the point? He'll get 100 hours like gardening. It's not worth my effort getting out of bed in the morning to put the case papers together. Okay? So it's not just jurisdiction of evidence and forensics. There's also where the enforcement happens, and it's where you can get decent tariffs as well to make it worth your while.
I do have a question, and I'm talking about precisely the balance, surveillance and privacy, like you said. And to go very quickly to what I'm trying to say, let me just pick 2 examples you made when you were presenting. I'm talking about like the email, the model you said, that for instance, is an email powered by the government, and let's say foreign governments are not allowed to access the email, and maybe the UK government could probably access that, and you could opt in to use it or not. Now, I'm thinking that if, for instance, somebody that's, let's say, citizen of the UK, since I have the opt-in option, if I want to do something that is probably compromising, then I could decide to not use that email since it's an option. And in that sense, then that's not surveillance. So if the government is looking to stop right there, with the use of that email, you might have to compel everybody to use that email, in which case privacy is being invaded. So it's one thing here or the other. And then I will refer to the other example about debating and having it as part of political arguments and stuff. Okay, okay, so if we are having this argument and we know how much private surveillance is being done, and we know that there's ATM machines somewhere there and here are being surveilled by the government, okay, and I'm aware of that. Now, in the event that I'm aware of that, and the government actually uses that to, let's say, get information about me, the fact that I'm aware of that, I mean, if we are trying to quantify privacy here, does that mean that how much of my privacy is being, should I say, embedded is any less than it would be if I did not know? So what I'm trying to say here is that it looks like every time we try to, I mean, if we actually want to balance it, we'll always end up diluting or sort of, I mean, not maintaining the integrity of one thing or the other. So I guess I'm trying to ask if there is actually a way to come to privacy and surveillance in a way that does not dilute or that actually maintains surveillance as surveillance and privacy as privacy, the way we know it.
I mean, I think your question is extremely good, and all of the problems that you mentioned there are real problems with the system that I described. I absolutely accept that. And there are more, by the way. So just to give you an example of another one, if you used this kind of system that I described, there is, of course, nothing that stops you doing an inner encryption. So on the outward, you've got this encryption that has the special property that I described, and then inside of that, you're using your own encryption as well. One thing I would just point out is that right now, if you send encrypted email, you're attracting attention to yourself. And certainly that's true for GCHQ. They will certainly kind of know, I mean, if they're monitoring you, they will certainly notice that you're sending encrypted mail. So you might like to have a system where you can send encrypted mail and have that as kind of part of the system. But that does not mean that there will always be ways. I mean, there's no way of avoiding the fact that cryptography is out there, and Alice and Bob will always be able to send encrypted mail to each other. Whatever systems you introduce on top of that, there will always just be the fact that they can write their own software or download software from somewhere and send encrypted mail to each other. So the idea of this is just that it would be a service that people could use if they found it gave them benefits. And I believe that this would be the case for some people. Some people would like to have an encrypted email that is kind of supported by public infrastructure. But I mean, I completely agree with you that it's probably not possible to. I mean, you certainly could not have a system which gives you privacy and security in a way that neither of them can be defeated, because I think that's just not in the nature of computer security. I mean, you can always kind of find ways of getting around things in computer security. So that's not what the intention was.
I mean, maybe if I could hitch on the end of this, certainly thinking about Helen Fenwick's comments on privacy and security in her book on civil liberties and human rights. She questions whether the two are necessarily set up as a false dichotomy, so you can either have security or you can have human rights, and you can't have both at the same time. But certainly privacy has always been seen in terms of human rights as something that comes with conditions, so there isn't any such thing in terms of rules absolute privacy. So if you have a look at the Human Rights Act, well, not the European Convention on Human Rights, you can see all the riders that come with the right to privacy. And I suppose it's the question of to what degree the government response is proportionate, necessary, and all of that.
Well, there's also the issue that only a tiny part of privacy is about the protection of content. Most of it is about metadata. It's about who contacted whom when, right? So if a lady visits a pregnancy advisory service website, that says something. If you go to a gay porn site, that says another. And it happens in real life too. The big privacy case, you know, Mirror versus Campbell or Campbell versus Mirror. Naomi Campbell is seen photographed on the public pavement leaving a meeting of Narcotics Anonymous. Now, before that, any lawyer would have said somebody, you know, in the public street, there's no expectation of privacy. The appeal court, of course, found otherwise. The mere circumstance of her coming out at that meeting was information in which there was an expectation of privacy. Now, encryption does not deal with metadata. You need other mechanisms to deal with that. You need anonymity systems. You need things like Tor. And the problem is that if you suppress the metadata, then it becomes very difficult to get on with your life. Right? There are some things you can run through anonymity systems, but many things you can't. As you go around, if you're going to have the convenience of having a mobile phone, you're leaving a location trace behind. Not just the GPS signals you get, but which cell site you go to. That is widely available. If you use apps, the apps can find out where you are. The apps can find out what other apps are doing. All the things that make modern life convenient leave behind an enormous trail of metadata, which compromise your privacy far, far, far more thoroughly than the contents of almost any of the emails that you'll ever send. Dealing with that is a serious policy and technical problem.
I mean, if I were to be a criminal, I'd just go back to pen and paper. I wouldn't bother with any of this.
I have a question. So I'm going to show, well, there's a video that's coming up, but basically I've seen, like, I've actually heard a lot of negative things about cybercrime. And I don't know if anybody has seen about this. It's about Anonymous, and Anonymous is a hacker group right now, and it blew up a few weeks ago on CNN, and it's basically, they're targeting ISIS. This is not the representation of University of Leicester or myself, these options, these opinions, but I would just like to ask you, what do you think about this video? Because it seems to legitimize cybercrime and terrorism, and how to have a non-governmental organization hack into terrorist groups. So, do you want to play it? I don't know if it's going to work.
Yeah,
It should work.
Greetings, citizens of the world. We are Anonymous. Operation Access continues. First, we need to clarify a few things. We are Muslims, Christians, Jews. We are hackers, crackers, activists, fishers, agents, spies, or just the guy from next door. We are students, administrators, workers, clerks, unemployed, rich, poor. We are young or old, gay or straight. We wear smart clothes or rugs. We are hedonists, ascetics, joyriders or activists. We come from all races, countries, religions, and ethnicity. United as one, divided by zero. We are Anonymous. Remember, the terrorists that are calling themselves Islamic State, ISIS, are not Muslims. ISIS, we will hunt you, take down your sites, accounts, emails, and expose you. From now on, no safe place for you online. You will be treated like a virus, and we are the cure. We own the internet. No, some of ISIS Twitter accounts that were taken offline by Anonymous, Red Cult Team. You will find the link in the video description. Also, you will find some Facebook accounts suspected to have been keeping contact with the terrorists, ISIS, in Syria and Iraq. Won't hurt to keep an eye on them. ISIS, we are Anonymous. We are Legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us.
So basically my question is, what do you think about this group? Does this legitimize cybercrime? I mean, it's a terrorist group, definitely, but it has no government backing. So is this a positivity of cybercrime and cyberterrorism that can basically destroy companies or groups?
Well, I put up on my last but one slide the photograph of that guy Ryan Cleary. He was associated with Anonymous. So this is a movement rather than an organised conspiracy, right? But there's an issue here around what is protest and how do you react to protest. Now, if someone goes and spray paints a slogan on a bus shelter saying "Down with the IRA," for example, if the IRA man is standing there, he may get shot. But if a normal, sensible policeman apprehends him, what is he going to get? He's going to get fined £10 because people know that's an act of protest rather than an act of warfare or murder or whatever. Now, people often get this mixed up, and so you have that kid. What was his name? 15 years ago, who hacked the Pentagon just after 9/11 to try and find information about flying saucers. McKinnon, that was it. And he spent over 10 years fighting extradition because the view in Britain was that the appropriate penalty for that was, 100 hours light gardening, whereas the Americans wanted to throw him in jail for 200 years. Okay? So you can end up with differences of opinion on what is serious crime and what is trivial crime, or what is legitimate protest. Now, one of the things that we've been doing is running a number of user studies and MTurk experiments in America, and we find that Americans, like Europeans, are less vindictive towards criminals whose motives have been political, or demonstrations or whatever, rather than have been financial. But so far in America, at least, the politicians and the prosecutors haven't got that. And this may take years and years and years to sort out, because particularly in America, there's a lot of rhetoric about being very vindictive towards criminals, and there's also a lot of rhetoric about cyber terrorism, which is being used by the guys like the NSA and the FBI to pump up their budgets. So this is not fundamentally a technology thing, this is fundamentally a law and policy thing. It's something in which you guys should be taking an interest. What are the reasonable limits of free speech and political action online? And what happens when people slightly go over those limits?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think there's a danger of taking the law into your own hands and moving away from the rule of law. So whilst I suppose it's difficult for me to comment on a video I've only just seen, I think there is certainly, to echo the first respondent's, Professor Anderson's comments, there is a line between free speech and vigilante justice. And I'm quite concerned when it goes into taking the law into our own hands. But then again, the problem is that the cyber criminals don't play by the rules. So it's all very well us having lots of human rights and the government abiding by human rights, but then we're fighting with one hand tied behind our backs because the criminals just don't bother about those anyway.
Any more questions, please?
Yeah. There is a new subject called cyber-physical security. So what do you think about this paradigm of getting physical with security?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
What's cyber-physical security?
What is cyber-physical security?
Security of cyber-physical systems.
Now known as Internet of Things.
Yeah.
Just remarketing stuff that people have done for decades. It's how to break into gas meters.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that it's another way, the technology way, which we will see more and more of, and which will be a vector for loss of privacy and for cybercrime. I mean, I recently bought a Nest Learning thermostat, which is a thermostat you have in your house. It gives you the advantage that you can control your central heating when you're abroad or wherever you are, because you have a mobile phone app that does that. Of course, the way that's organized is that your central heating data is on a Google server, because Google recently bought Nest. So I think we're going to see more and more of that. All the devices in our houses will be reporting our activity to Google servers and the servers of other companies. And we see that with smart metering, and your TV probably has a webcam in it, and now the people on TV can see you just as much as you can see them. And yes, we lose a lot of privacy in that way. I mean, coming back to the video, it just struck me that, there are a lot of ways in which humans can fight each other, and computers are just yet another way in which they can do that. So, in some sense, the world has seen all this before. What I think makes computers a bit challenging at the moment is that it's developing so fast, and there's a lot of asymmetry in what different groups know. I mean, for example, there's a huge number of people who know very little about computers and therefore are very vulnerable to cybercrime. I expect that will decrease over the next 100 years, because things have got to stabilize a bit. I mean, we're in a situation which is very unstable. I expect that things will stabilize, and the gap between the knowledge that different people have will reduce, and then it will be a bit easier for people to understand what are the opportunities and limitations of that computers give us.
Yes, I mean the issue is to get the good things out of it without encouraging bad things. And at the moment we're not quite sure what the good things are. It's undecided. I mean, is hacking necessarily a crime?
Well, in America, information security mechanisms are used a lot to support business models, right? So you buy a printer for 40 quid and you think that's cheap, and then you've got to buy another ink cartridge and it's 30 quid.
Yeah.
And there's fancy cryptography used to stop you using cheap printer cartridges. So in America they litigated this in a famous case. It's the static control components case. And they tried to use the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. This was one of the printer makers, to argue that static control components, which did cryptanalysis for industrial purposes, had broken the Digital Millennium Copyright Act by extracting the printer manufacturer's cryptographic keys so that other people could make compatible printer cartridges. And the Ninth Circuit, I think it was threw this out, saying basically that when it comes to industrial security, there is a free market in cryptology, that the printer makers are free to hire the best cryptographers that they can find to try and make the printer cartridges more locked into the printers, and the printer cartridge aftermarket people are free to hire the best cryptanalysts they can find, chip analysts and device teardown people and so on, to try and undo this. So there's an example in which hacking is explicitly lawful and widely practiced, and there's half a dozen firms make their living from doing semiconductor reverse engineering.
All right, I'd like to apologize for interrupting you at that point. Thank you for a wonderful discussion. Now, before moving to the closing remark, our president and founder, Mr. Abraham Tuyo, will make the closing remarks. Please, Mr. Tuyo, to the...
I just want to say thank you to our speakers, Professor Anderson, Professor Ryan, Dr. Chatterjee, for coming. Obviously, cybercrime is a very big subject area, and we will continue to discuss it. But we've learned quite a lot today from surveillance, from the history of cryptology to surveillance and privacy to domestic violence to ATMs and automated systems. We've learned a bit today, and I think it's the purpose of GEEKLAW. The idea is to try to bring the two sides, by that I mean law and information technology, together. And we hope that next year, if your schedule is permitted and your calendar is open, that when the event is scheduled again to happen, you will join us again. And I'm sure at that time we'll probably have other issues from the NSA and other things that have happened since then. I want to especially thank our event coordinators for their fantastic job of putting the event together. Khaled for playing the host and guiding the entire event. This is our last conference for this year. We've had ODR, we've had electronic doctor, which is telemedicine. And above all the members of GEEKLAW, we hope next year we'll have more from the computer science, other disciplines that will participate in this conference. So on behalf of our entire membership, I want to say thank you very much for coming, and we appreciate it. And if you could please give our panelists a hand. One last thing, we have a reception outside.
Boulevard Lounge.
That's it?
Boulevard Lounge. Yes, it's a different building. We'll guide you through.
Okay. So if you could just follow us there.
Just for a quick one, if anyone's not signed up for a certificate, come find us.
Yeah. We're issuing a certificate for this event.
Symphony is at the
Thank you so
back.
much. Appreciate it. Thank you, appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you. Haven't been on the Okay, fantastic. Hello. Oh, I just want to take this out of your way.